The story of macOS begins long before the name macOS existed. When the original Macintosh arrived in 1984, its operating system helped define the personal computer as something visual, friendly, and approachable. Instead of typing commands into a terminal, users clicked icons, opened windows, and moved a pointer across the screen. But that early Mac system, later known as classic macOS, was built for a very different age of computing. It was elegant and influential, yet underneath the surface it lacked many features that modern operating systems would come to depend on, including strong memory protection, robust multitasking, and a modern Unix-style foundation. By the 1990s, Apple had a beloved interface but an aging technical core. The company needed a replacement that could carry the Mac into the Internet era and beyond. Apple tried for years to create a successor to classic macOS from within. The challenge was enormous. The new system had to feel like a Mac, support developers, satisfy longtime users, and also solve deep architectural problems. Projects came and went, but Apple struggled to ship a truly modern replacement. Meanwhile, another company was building technology that would eventually become the foundation of the Mac's future. That company was Next, founded by Steve Jobs after he left Apple in the 1980s. Next's operating system combined a powerful Unix base with advanced development tools and a polished graphical environment. When Apple purchased Next in early 1997, it was not simply buying a company. It was acquiring the technological foundation for the next generation of the Mac. The modern macOS lineage is built on this Next heritage. Unlike classic macOS, the new system used a Unix-based architecture, drawing from technologies including BSD. This brought features that mattered deeply beneath the interface: multi-user access, TCP/IP networking, memory protection, and a more stable system design. Memory protection meant that one misbehaving application was less likely to bring down the entire computer. Unix foundations also made the Mac more attractive to developers, scientists, and technical users who wanted a polished desktop with serious underlying power. This is one of the most important shifts in Apple history. The Mac kept its consumer-friendly identity, but underneath it became a modern Unix system. The familiar Mac experience was about to be rebuilt on a completely different code base. The first public step into this new era was not a regular consumer release. In 1999, Apple released Mac OS X Server 1.0. It was based on the technologies acquired from Next, but it did not yet include the famous Aqua interface that most people associate with early Mac OS X. This server release was important because it showed where Apple was heading, toward a modern operating system with enterprise-grade foundations. But for everyday Mac users, the real turning point came in March 2001 with Mac OS X 10.0. Marketed around the Roman numeral X, meaning 10, it was not just Mac OS 9 with a new coat of paint. It was a fundamentally different operating system, with a new architecture, new interface ideas, and a new long-term direction. Mac OS X 10.0 introduced regular users to Aqua, Apple's glossy new visual language. It featured translucent menus, bright buttons, smooth animation, and the dock, which became one of the defining elements of the Mac desktop. But the transition was not painless. Early Mac OS X was visually striking, yet it could feel slow and incomplete compared with the mature classic Mac OS that users already knew. Apple had to convince people that this was the future, even if the first version did not yet feel perfect. To ease the change, Apple included the classic environment in versions 10.0 through 10.4. This compatibility layer allowed many Mac OS 9 applications to run inside the new system, giving users and developers time to adapt instead of forcing an overnight break. The earliest Mac OS X releases also began a naming tradition that would become part of Apple culture. Mac OS X 10.0 and 10.1 had internal Big Cat code names, Cheetah and Puma. At first, these were not the primary public marketing names. But with Mac OS X 10.2 Jaguar, Apple embraced the cat theme openly. Jaguar was followed by panther, tiger, leopard, snow leopard, lion, and mountain lion. These names helped Apple turn operating system updates into recognizable events. They were easier to remember than version numbers and gave each release a distinct personality. The Big Cat era also represented Apple steadily refining the system, improving performance, adding features, strengthening compatibility, and making Mac OS X feel less like an ambitious transition and more like the Mac's natural home. During the 2000s, Mac OS X matured alongside Apple's broader transformation. The iPod brought new attention to the company, the Mac moved from PowerPC processors to Intel chips, and the operating system became more capable with every release. Starting with the Intel build of Mac OS X 10.5 Leopard, Apple's operating system was certified as a Unix system conforming to the single Unix specification. That certification was more than a technical badge. It confirmed that the Mac was not merely inspired by Unix ideas, it met recognized standards. For many users, the value of Mac OS X was that it combined two worlds, a polished desktop environment for ordinary tasks and a powerful command line, networking, and development foundation for professionals. Server versions also played a role in the macOS timeline. For years, Apple offered Mac OS X Server as a separate operating system designed for managing services such as file sharing, user accounts, web hosting, and network resources. But Apple's server strategy changed over time. With Mac OS X 10.7 Lion, released in 2011, Mac OS X Server stopped being a standalone operating system. Instead, server management tools were offered as an add-on application. This reflected a broader shift. Apple was focusing less on traditional server markets and more on personal devices, consumer services, and integrated ecosystems. The server app itself was eventually discontinued in 2022, and it became incompatible with macOS 13 Ventura and later. The name of the operating system changed as Apple's product family expanded. For years, the official brand was Mac OS X. With Lion, Apple sometimes used the shortened name OS X, and with OS X Mountain Lion, that shorter branding became official. The change made sense in a world where Apple also had iOS powering the iPhone and iPad. Then, in 2016, Apple renamed the Mac operating system again with macOS Sierra. This brought the Mac in line with Apple's other platform names, iOS, watchOS, and tvOS. The lowercase Mac and uppercase OS signaled that the Mac was now one member of a larger software ecosystem, while still keeping its own distinct desktop identity. The naming theme changed too. After years of big cats, Apple moved to California place names starting with OS X 10.9 Mavericks in 2013. This new pattern tied the operating system more closely to Apple's home state and gave each release a different kind of personality. Mavericks, Yosemite, El Capitan, Sierra, High Sierra, Mojave, Catalina, Big Sur, Monterey, Ventura, Sonoma, Sequoia, and Tahoe all fit into this geography-based tradition. These names were not random labels, they reflected a more mature macOS era. The operating system was no longer fighting to prove itself as the replacement for classic macOS. It had become the center of the Mac experience, and the annual updates were about refinement, integration, security, design changes, and alignment with Apple's broader ecosystem. For nearly 2 decades, macOS remained version 10 at the major number level. From macOS X 10.0 in 2001 through macOS 10.15 Catalina in 2019, Apple kept the same major version number while changing the minor number each year. That long run ended in 2020 with macOS 11 Big Sur. The version number shift was symbolic, because Big Sur also arrived during one of the biggest Mac transitions ever, the move from Intel processors to Apple Silicon. Big Sur introduced a redesigned interface with more spacing, rounded elements, and visual cues that aligned the Mac more closely with iPhone and iPad software. The Mac was still the Mac, but its operating system was now part of a hardware and software strategy built around Apple's own chips. After Big Sur, Apple incremented the major version number with each annual release. Monterey became macOS 12, Ventura became macOS 13, Sonoma became macOS 14, and Sequoia became macOS 15. This made macOS versioning simpler and easier to follow after the long era of version 10. Then Apple shifted again with macOS 26 Tahoe, released in 2025, as part of a unified versioning approach across its operating systems. Instead of the Mac having one numbering rhythm and other Apple platforms having their own, the versions were aligned around the year following their WWDC announcement. The result was a cleaner cross-platform identity, especially as features increasingly move across Mac, iPhone, iPad, Watch, and Apple TV. The history of macOS is ultimately the story of Apple replacing the foundation of the Mac without losing the soul of the Mac. Classic macOS made graphical computing approachable, but it could not carry Apple forever. Next technology gave Apple a modern Unix base. Mac OS X introduced Aqua, the dock, memory protection, and a long transition path through the classic environment. The Big Cat years turned updates into recognizable milestones. The California name era reflected a mature platform tied to Apple's identity. Big Sur marked a new chapter with Apple Silicon and a break from version 10. And Tahoe represents Apple's current push toward unified versioning across its ecosystem. Across all those changes, the goal has remained the same: keep the Mac familiar, while rebuilding it for each new era of computing. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.